Just stop, okay? Stop talking. She felt like hitting him again. The stresses of life were starting to push her over the edge. She thought, doesn't he realize that the more he talks big, the more he's going to leave us disappointed? Luka kept quiet. No matter what he said, it was obvious he was wasting his breath. His family had heard enough of his talk. Now, only actions could put things right. He was a little surprised at the fine of $150,000, but he honestly didn't feel like it was that much of a deal. He was brimming with ideas and was confident that he could get the funds he needed. He was sure that when he could take out the money and show it to Marcia, then she would change her mind about him. That night, Marcia was tormented with nightmares. The sound of her sobbing haunted Luka until the rising sun broke the horizon. In the morning, Luka went out to buy breakfast. By the time he returned, he found that they had a visitor. It was his brother-in-law, Morgan Clark. Luka didn't know Marcia's family well. That wasn't because he didn't want to, but because the Clarks looked down on him. Ever since he and Marcia married, the Clark family had never been particularly nice to him. His in-laws always mocked him. They didn't think he was good enough for their daughter. Luka of the past wouldn't have been very happy about finding his brother-in-law in his home, but the newly reborn Luka was more forgiving. He could see why he wasn't very popular with Marcia's family.
Hi, Morgan. Have you had breakfast?
Luka took the first step by greeting him in a friendly manner. Suddenly, Morgan swung his arm at Luka's face. As quick as lightning, he dodged Morgan's arm. The fact that his blow had missed Luka seemed only to fuel Morgan's anger further.
I'll kill you.
Marcia had called Morgan earlier. She felt that she had no choice. The size of the fine was just too much, and she needed help from someone she could rely on. Her parents had been opposed to her marrying Luka, so she couldn't dare tell them of her predicament. At the end of the day, Marcia's fine had nothing to do with Luka, but Morgan didn't see it like that. Morgan thought,
He's managed to drag my sister down to his level. Look at the mess she's in.
Uncle Morgan, don't hurt Daddy.
Iris cried as she ran over and grabbed Morgan's legs. Although Morgan disliked Luka, he liked his niece very much. On seeing the tears welling in Iris's eyes, he backed off and knelt to comfort her. He gently rubbed her back.
It's okay, little one. I'm not going to beat your daddy. Don't cry.
Even if he wasn't going to punish Luka physically, he sure as hell wasn't going to let it go. He turned to Luka and said,
Don't think that you can keep my sister here just because you're married to her. You're trash and not worthy of her at all. There are plenty of men who want her.
Luka didn't argue. Instead, he looked at his wife, who had just walked out of the bedroom.
Are you going to borrow money from him? So, you still don't believe me? I said I would get the money.
Get the money?
Morgan snorted in disbelief.
Luka, where are you going to get the money? You can't even pull together 10 grand, let alone 150,000. You're all talk.
Turning to his sister, Morgan said,
Marcia, don't worry. I've already gotten enough money to cover the fine. Don't waste your time on this trash anymore. Get a divorce.
Luka retorted coldly.
Keep your money. I told you I'll make enough for her.
Can you stop talking like that? Marcia sighed in exhaustion. Her eyes were filled with distrust as she looked at Luka. After thinking it through, Luka swore.
If I can't raise the money in 4 days, then I'll sign the divorce papers if that's what you really want.
That struck Marcia dumb. In the past, when she had brought up divorce, Luka flatly refused to even talk about it. He had always said that they were married, and she was his woman, both in life and death. Marcia wondered, I can't believe he said that. He's never even wanted to discuss divorce before. The conditions he has set are ridiculous. How does he expect to get the money when he hasn't even got a proper job? Morgan laughed mockingly.
Fine then, 4 days. If you can get the money in 4 days, I'll kneel at your feet and apologize. But if you can't...
If I can't get it, then I'll leave you all forever.
For some reason, Marcia trembled at the seriousness of his words. She could feel a powerful determination behind them. It was something she had never felt before. Even Morgan felt it. But soon enough, his usual sneer had returned.
That's rich coming from you. We shall see, you piece of trash.
He thought that Luka was talking about divorce. Neither of them knew that Luka had actually been talking about death. He thought,
I've been given a second chance. I need to make up for my past stupidity. If I can't manage to do something as simple as getting the money my wife needs, then what's the point of all this?
Morgan gave Luka one last death glare.
You'd better be ready with the money when I come back, or you'll have hell to pay.
After a few words of comfort for Marcia, Morgan left. The door closed with a deafening slam. What's the point of making such a bet? Looking at the frigid expression on her face, Luka merely said,
I'll pay the fine as soon as possible.
He didn't bother explaining how. He just turned and left the house. Luka headed straight for the seafood market. The fishmongers had already prepared his order of Boston lobster. He didn't hang around to chat with them, but paid them $150 per lobster. The fishmongers were overjoyed. The greatest risk in their line of work was overstocking, and with each passing day, the risk grew bigger. Live lobsters could be sold for a high price, but if they went bad before they were sold, they'd be left with nothing but a stinking loss. They wished wealthy clients like Luka would drop by more regularly. They were so glad of his business that they even offered to lend him a trolley for ease of transport.
Hey man, are you from the purchasing department of the Pacific Ocean Hotel?
No.
Luka answered casually before speeding off toward the hotel. The kitchens of the hotel had descended into chaos. All the lobsters had died and gone bad, and the kitchen staff were close to passing out from panic. The general manager was desperately trying to find a solution, but the customers were not willing to change their order. Luka noticed this mess as he walked into the hotel. He looked around and called over an employee. The employee pointed out the purchasing manager, and Luka walked toward the man. The manager looked as though he knew exactly what he was doing. Luka imagined he had been in the job for years and probably in the industry since he started working. As Luka stood to one side, taking in the scene, the purchasing manager was roaring at the kitchen staff and wondering why he had left a part-timer in charge of something as important as the stock of lobster for their big wedding event.
Hello, sir.
Who are you?
I'm in the seafood industry. I heard you might be in need of Boston lobsters.
How much for one?
$280. Each lobster weighs at least 3 pounds.
No way, that's too expensive. Why don't you go rob a bank or something? Get out!
The purchasing manager waved at him impatiently. Luka, however, wasn't angered by him or put off at all. After all, he had, indeed, quoted a price a lot higher than the market price.
Think about it. I'll be waiting for you in the lobby for the next half an hour.
I said I don't want them. Get out of here!
The purchasing manager yelled at him. He knew extortion when he saw it. 15 minutes later, the general manager of the hotel rushed in.
Where are the lobsters?
What do you mean? I thought they were delivered earlier.
You heard what I said. I've just been informed by the chef that we don't have any live lobsters. You know how important this banquet is?
The general manager knew that the customer would never agree to any changes to the menu, even if the hotel offered to organize the whole banquet free of charge. It was a matter of pride. The customer was an important man and expected to get what he had asked for. He realized that they had two choices. Either they get some more lobsters immediately, or they prepare for the hotel to be shut down. And he really didn't relish the thought of the latter.
Leave it to me. There are always plenty of Boston lobsters at the market. It won't be too difficult to find another supplier. The banquet will go ahead as planned.
Well, I've been informed that earlier this morning, someone visited the market and bought every last lobster. There isn't a single lobster left.
That can't be possible. The fishmongers always have some leftovers at the end of the day. How can it be that on the day we need them, they've all sold out? What kind of coincidence is this?
Are there any other places we can get lobster?
There's only one stall that sells them in the entire seafood market. You can't buy Boston lobsters anywhere else. Even if we found another supplier in the next few minutes, they wouldn't be able to deliver them on time.
The general manager was fuming and on the verge of slapping him.
What kind of purchasing manager are you? It's your job to ensure we have the supplies. Can't you do anything properly?
But it was out of the purchasing manager's hands. He was just the person in charge of placing orders. It wasn't his fault that the lobsters had all died. At that moment, a kitchen staffer interrupted them.
Didn't I see someone here earlier trying to sell you some Boston lobsters? You said they were too expensive, and you sent him away without negotiating the price.
The general manager glared at him.
Where is he now?
He said he was going to wait outside for half an hour in case I changed my mind.
Then what are you waiting for? If we can't sort this out, I won't be the only one with their job on the line.
The general manager thought,
What a fool this man is. He obviously doesn't realize how urgent the situation is. We must get those Boston lobsters, no matter what they cost.
Meanwhile, Luca had been sitting calmly in the reception area. He was looking around and admiring the decor when he saw the purchasing manager hurrying over with a welcoming smile on his face.
I'm so sorry to have kept you waiting. Are your Boston lobsters still up for sale?
Luca looked up and nodded in reply.
Yeah, they are. I've been waiting for you as I said I would.
How many are there?
I have around 60 of them. They were all freshly caught this morning.
The purchasing manager heaved a sigh of relief.
We want all of them, but we need them right now.
Sure, they are right outside. But didn't you say they were too expensive?
On the contrary, it's a very fair price.
Of course, he didn't really believe that. Any fool could see that they are overpriced. Nevertheless, the purchasing manager dared not offend Luca and risk losing his only chance to get his hands on the lobsters. After all, the general manager had made it clear what would happen if he didn't get them. If he dared to start bargaining with the man, he would risk losing his job as well as the lobsters. There were 59 Boston lobsters, and the man was charging $280 per piece. That meant that the total of the entire batch was just over $16,000. The financial department had already been informed of the urgency of the situation, and the purchasing manager was able to authorize immediate payment. Luca watched as the purchasing manager counted out the lobsters, thoroughly checking each one and making sure they were all still alive. Only when he had finished was Luca finally allowed to leave the hotel premises. The hotel staff couldn't help but feel nervous after the incident. If it hadn't been for the salesman showing up out of nowhere, they would all be looking for new jobs. They had a lot to thank him for. But some of them wondered if it was just too much of a coincidence. The lobsters that had been paid for and delivered earlier that morning had all died. Then, out of the blue, a salesman turned up with just the right amount. The only difference was that those lobsters were shockingly expensive. The purchasing manager was going to have some explaining to do, but it wasn't the right time to start pointing fingers and assigning blame. The banquet's success was the top priority. After handing over the lobster, Luca didn't go straight home with his cash. Instead, he went to the Western District and walked toward the sales department of the Forest Group. He was planning to make a purchase with the cash he had just earned. The Forest Group was a new housing development in a relatively poor area. Real estate prices were low and unlikely to increase in the near future. The properties had first been put on the market 3 years earlier, but a fifth were still vacant and unsold. The staff in the sales office were all in low spirits, and the 3 years of waiting to make a sale had exhausted them. Some had moved on to new jobs, and most of those who were left behind were just waiting to be laid off. As Luca walked toward the counter, no one looked up to greet him. However, as soon as he mentioned that he was there to buy a parking spot, they immediately started to take notice of him. Although the prices were low, later that day, there would be a shocking announcement. As a result, house prices in the area would double almost overnight. Luca didn't have much money and certainly nowhere near enough to buy a house, but the money on hand was still enough for a parking spot. The parking area was divided into 2 parts. One part was outdoors in the open air, but another area had been constructed underground. When news of the railway and the school's construction spread, the parking spots would rise in price from $90,000 to $100,000, depending on the location. With just over $16,000 to spend, Luka was able to choose a rather decent parking spot. Of course, he couldn't make the full payment, but the staff were desperate for a sale and happy to accept the 10% down payment. Although it didn't seem that big a deal, he knew that its value would double by the following morning. When that happened, he would transfer the contract to someone else and use the money to pay both Marcia's fine and Iris's school fees. The rest of the money could be used to fund future projects. With the contract in his hand, Luka felt relieved. On the way home, he popped into the supermarket and bought a few ingredients for dinner. He wanted to surprise Marcia by making her a nice meal. He smiled as he walked through the front door of his house. He was glad to be home, but his expression changed when he found Marcia packing up her things.
What are you doing?
He asked as he put the groceries on the table. Iris ran over and hugged his legs with tears in her eyes.
Mommy said you were lying, and I can't go to kindergarten.
Luka Miller, you should be ashamed of yourself for getting her hopes up like that. You let her take the trial classes, knowing that she wouldn't be able to continue with them. Hearing those words, he finally understood why his wife was leaving him.
I'll pay the fees tomorrow.
How are you going to do that? Have you suddenly become rich overnight? She let loose an almost deranged cackle as she closed her suitcase and snatched Iris away from him. I've had enough of your lies and false promises. We're leaving. With the level of stress from both life and work, she could no longer bear to live like that. She had dispelled all thoughts of suicide and had started to consider the possibility of getting divorced. The incident with the kindergarten was the final straw. She no longer believed in him.
Can't you just give me one more chance? Just give me until tomorrow. You'll see that I'm not lying. I can be a good husband and father. Just give me the chance to prove it.
You've had enough chances. Stay away from me and my daughter. I don't want her to have a liar for her father. Iris continued to cry and tried to grab her father, but Marcia stopped her. Looking at his wife mercilessly dragging his daughter away, Luka felt depressed. He had honestly believed that after his rebirth, he could easily turn the tables and get his life back on track. But reality hit him hard. He had treated her badly, and it would take more than a few promises to show her that he was a new man.